Guys, so today's video is a review of factoring. So we have already started to do several types of factoring. So I want to start you off with a review of what we've already done. So the first thing is when you have this, which is called a difference of two squares. You have a square, a perfect square with a minus in the middle. Most of you know this is not any issue for you. You do your two parentheses. Since the last term is negative, you have one positive, one negative, x, and then the square root of 4 is 2 and 2. So that was your basic one. Then we learned how to do a, where you factor out a GCF. You use this in the grouping factoring that I taught you the other day. So here you would say, well, what's the greatest common factor between these two terms? So they're both even, so I know a 2 will factor out. He has 3 x's, this term has 2 x's, so I can factor out 2 x's. And now, really, when you factor, it's just division. 10 divided by 2 is 5. X cubed divided by x squared is x. 4 divided by 2 is 2. X squared divided by x squared is nothing. Alright, so that was your GCF. This was a difference of two squares. Okay, the next type of factoring that we did is where you had a trinomial with nothing in front of the x squared term. And I'm actually going to do 2 of these. I'm going to put them on the same line because I really want to make sure that you understand your parentheses. So your last term of any factoring problem is going to tell you what the sign should be inside these parentheses. So this one is a positive. So to get a positive number, I either multiply a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. And the middle term will tell us what that it wants. So this middle term is negative, so I'm going to choose my negative. Now, the way that you read these, remember, we've done these before, you're looking for terms that multiply to give you 40, add to give you 13. So I can go through my factors of 40, and some people like to come over here and write their little chart, 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, 5 and 8. And then they look at the terms and look to the ones that would add to give them 13. And we know now it's going to be the 5 and the 8. Okay? Now, notice I'm not solving them. I'm not telling you that x is 5 and x is 8. When you factor, you're actually done right at this step because it's not an equation. Now, let's look at this guy over here. He ends in a negative. So now think to yourself, how do I get a negative? Well, I would multiply a positive times a negative. So I need one positive, one negative. So again, I'm asking things that multiply to give me 14, subtract to give me 5. So if you want, you can come over here and list your factors of 14. So 1 and 14, 2 and 7. And I now look at my list and say, well, which of those subtract to give me 5? And I know it's the 2 and the 7. Now, I know some teachers had you put your signs here. I don't worry about signs until I come over here and I'm like, well, I need that 5 to be negative, so I'm going to let the bigger number, the 7, get the negative, and the positive go with the 2. And then I'm done. Okay? And the last type of factoring that you had reviewed with me is factoring by grouping. So again, if you have a 4-term polynomial, typically what we like to do is group 2 by 2. And so I say, well, what do these guys have in common? What's their GCF? And we have x squared. And now again, it's a division problem. X cubed divided by x squared is x. 5x squared divided by x squared is 5. Here I'm going to factor out. Remember, we always take his sign. So negative 2x. And now again I divide. Negative 2x divided by negative 2. I'm sorry, that should not be an x. Can you guys correct that for me? So because he doesn't have an x to give. Alright, so negative 2x divided by negative 2x is x. Negative 10 divided by negative 2 is 5. Double check that these match, and they do. So now you're done. X squared minus 2, x plus 5. Okay? And this is called factor by grouping. So far, all those are in your toolbox. Factoring is something that you guys reviewed when you started it in Algebra 1, you reviewed it in Algebra 2, and now we're finally doing it again. It's a huge skill. Okay? So, those of you who are not very good at it, want to make sure that this is something that we definitely work on during Fluco time, because it's going to come back and haunt you this entire course if you don't figure it out. Alright. So, let's do a couple new ones. Now, different teachers teach this totally different ways. So, I'm going to show you the way that I like to do it. That is not to say that this is the only way that it can be done. Okay, but for me it works great. I don't have to do, I know some teachers teach guess and check, which I think takes forever if you can't figure out the factors. Some teachers do the slip and slide method, but I'm going to show you the method that I like. Okay? So the method I like is actually going to be factoring by grouping. It's kind of a combination of this t-table with factoring by grouping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply these two terms. So I want things that give me a negative 42, and then I write the positive 19 at the bottom. So I want things that multiply to give me 42, subtract to give me 19. Alright? So I go through some factors of 42. I have 1 in 42. I have 2 in 21. Let's see, I know 6 and 7. 4 doesn't go into it, and I think that's it for my factors. So now I look up here and I make sure that I'm paying attention that I want them to subtract to give me 19. And I'm going to pick the 2 and the 21 because I know that they will subtract to give me 19. Now, what is the sign of the 19? He's positive, so I'm going to make the 21 positive and the 2 negative. Now, I'm going to stop for a minute. Do you understand why that one had to be positive and one had to be negative? Because what is my last term? My last term was negative, so these have to have different signs. Alright, now the next thing that you do if you're using my method is you come over here, you leave the 6x squared, and you leave the negative 7. And you're actually going to make a substitution for this 19. Because I know that I'm going to need this 2 and the 21. And can you go back to the chart for just a minute? I'm going to put an X here so that I remember that these need to be X's. Or some people do that when you carry it in. Alright, so I have a negative 2X and a positive 21X. So I'm going to go through that one more time. I did my table. I found the two that work. I take out my middle term and I put in a substitution for what that equals. Doesn't this now look like your 4-term polynomial? And how do you factor a 4-term polynomial? By grouping. So let's go ahead and group. And this is one of the reasons why you learn grouping. So now ask yourself, alright, so now you ask yourself, what is their GCF? We're going to pull out a 2x, and so now 6x squared divided by 2x is 3x, and 2x divided by 2x, this is the term that a lot of you guys forget. 2x divided by 2x is 1. Now let's look at our second term. So I factor out his sign, and now what do 21 and 7 have in common? Hopefully you said a 7. And then you get 3x minus 1. Again, do your quick check. Do they match? And they do, so I'm done. 2x plus 7, 3x minus 1. Alrighty? So again, this isn't the only way you can factor. If you guys know those other methods, either guess and check or slip and slide, you can certainly use those. I'm just giving you one more option. Alright, let's try number 2. I have 3x squared plus 23x plus 30. Alright, multiply your first term times your last term, and I get positive 90x squared. Take your middle term and put it at the bottom. Alrighty, so things that multiply to give me 90, add to give me my 23. Alright, so let's go through a ton of factors of 90. You ready? So we're going to do 1 and 90. I'm going to write real small. 2 and 45, 3 and 30, 4 I don't think goes into it, 5 and 18, 6 and 15 I think. No, yes, no, yes. Okay, sorry, I'm having an argument with myself, but we've worked ourselves out. And I'm going to stop for a minute, okay? I understand that I could keep going for a few more seconds, but I'm going to take a look at this long list and see, do I have anything that would be 23? So let's see, 1 and 90, nope. 2 and 45, nope. 3 and 30, nope. 5 and 18, because again, I want to add. So 5 plus 18 gives me my 23. Now, look at your last term. He's positive. So in my chart, I either need 2 positives or 2 negatives. Middle term says you want positive. Okay? Now decide, do you want to put your x here in the chart, or are you going to put your x when you bring it over here? It's a preference thing. So, lead term stays. Last term stays. We're going to take out the middle term, and we are going to make a substitution. So, instead of calling it 23x, I can call it 5x and 18x. Oh, and I'm sorry, that 30 should have a positive in front of him. Okay, do you guys understand that 5 plus 18 is 23? That's why I can just make that substitution. And now it becomes a problem that you really know how to do. It now becomes just a substitution problem. So do your grouping, factor out your greatest common factors. I'm going to go ahead and freeze my screen and let you try this on your own, and then we'll go ahead and compare answers. And remember, you're asking yourself, what is the term that would go into both? Alright, are you ready for the big reveal? If not, hit pause for a minute, finish up your problem before I expose mine. Here we go. So the first thing I did was I factored out an x from the first grouping, and I factored out a positive 6 from the second grouping. I did my quick checks that they were both the same, and there is my final answer. Okay? So far, so good. Alright, let me look at the time. We're doing great. I'm going to do one more with you, and I'm going to up the ante just a teeny bit. So let's say I have 3x squared minus 13xy plus 4y squared. Now, don't let this panic you because you see a y squared. It's okay. We're going to be able to handle it just like we've handled every other problem. Alright, so I check out my last term. I multiply first times last. So 4 and times 3 is 12. If you want to write x squared, y squared, you can. If that really upsets you, don't put it there. You can add it in later. Alright, take his sign. He's positive. And the middle term is a negative 13xy. So ask yourself, what are you doing? Things that multiply to give me 12, add to give me 13. Okay? Alright, so factors of 12. 1 and 12. 2 and 6. 3 and 4. And I want add to give me 13. So 3 and 4 add to give me 7. Nope. 2 and 6 add to give me 8. Nope. Ah, the 1 and the 12, ironic enough. Now again, if you want to add their terms, you can. Look, they will always get whatever's here at the bottom. So since this is an xy, they're really going to get an xy. If you go back to the one before them, it was an x, and they would have gotten an x, which is what they did when they came into the problem. Alright, so let's take the negative 13 out, and let's do our substitution. We need to decide a sign. So, last term, or the middle term is negative, so I need both of these guys to be negative. So the 3x squared stays, the 4y squared stays, and I take out the 13xy and put in a negative 1xy and a negative 12xy. Now I'm ready to do my grouping. And I'm actually going to walk this one with you since we've got x's and y's, so that way you don't have a panic attack. Alright, here we go. What do these guys have in common? They have a 3. Now, worst case scenario, every term that you have has at least a 1 that you can always factor out. Alright, do they have anything else in common? He has 2 x's. This term has 1x, so I can factor out an x. So 3x squared divided by 3x is x. Oh, bother, I cannot factor out a 3. What in the world am I doing? Alright, I apologize for that. Can you guys correct that for me? Because this term doesn't have a 3, right? A 3 is not a factor of 1. So the only thing I can factor out is an x. So 3x squared divided by x is 3x. I'm doing a morning video and I haven't had my coffee yet. And when I factor out an x here, I get 1y. And are you guys okay if I just write it as y? Alright, let's come over here. What do these have in common? Let's see, 12 and 4's greatest common factor is a 4. But remember, we always want to take out his sign. So I'm going to factor out a negative 4. So 12, and do they have anything else in common? He's got an xy, he's got a y squared. Ooh, I can factor out a y. So negative 12 divided by negative 4 is positive 3. He had an x and a y. We factor out the y, he's left with an x. 4 divided by negative 4 is negative 1, which I'm just not going to write. You can if you want. He had y squared. We factor out a y. I'm left with a y. Do your quick check. Do they match? Yes, they do. So now I get x minus 4y and 3x minus y. And we're done. Alright, so I want to do one more with you, and that's where it's going to say to factor it completely. So example 2, factor completely. Let's say I have 81x to the 4th minus 16. So he's 2 terms. I'm hoping he is a difference of 2 squares. So let's do our check. Is 81 a perfect square? Yep. Is 16 a perfect square? Yep. Connected by minus. So this is awesome. It's going to factor just pretty as we want it to. Square root of 81 is 9. X to the 4th, if you take the square root of him, you get x squared and x squared. Square root of 16 is 4 and 4. So it looks like we're ready to box it and be done. Except, what is this guy? Isn't he a perfect square and a perfect square? So I think this is also a difference of 2 squares. Now this guy we can't do anything with because of the plus sign, so he's actually finished. But this one I can factor one more time and get 3x plus 2, right? Square root of 9x squared is 3x. Square root of 4 is 2. And this would be my final answer. Alright, so that wraps up a review of factoring, and we will work on it tomorrow in class. Have a great night.